All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week so far. We are continuing our player rankings today with number 17 and number 16. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. Don't forget, it's helpful if you leave a rating and a review on that front. And then keep dropping mailbag questions in those YouTube comments so we can keep hitting them throughout the remainder of the summer. Again, at the tail end of today's show, now that I'm back from vacation and we've had our player rankings videos out on the feed for a while, I took a bunch of mailbag questions from the first 3 videos where you guys argued against my rankings, and we're going to go back and forth a little bit. That's going to be the format throughout the rest of this list. It's going to be a couple of players and then mailbag kind of argument style at the tail end of the show. I had a couple of people talking about how it's kind of weird how we only have 2 or 3 players in each video. To be honest, it's just about filling time in the summer. There's no rush here. It's August 20th. We've got another month and a half before we even get training camp opening up, or a little less than a month and a half. And so we've got some time to kill. And so we're going to spend a good chunk of that at the tail end of September going through some of our season previews. But in the meantime, we got some time to kill over the next couple of weeks. So I'd rather talk about something that I find really interesting, which is player rankings, instead of going into something else that I don't find as interesting. And I'd rather just get more in depth with it and have more arguments with you guys, have it be more interactive and things along those lines. So we're going to be kind of just taking a few players a day, and then we'll argue about it at the end, and then we'll move on until we get to the end of the list. Today, we start the beginning of a new tier. Now, if you guys remember, as I did my kind of like intro in the first video, I view everybody on this list in 4 tiers. The top tier is like your top tier superstars. These guys are guys that I project to be perennial MVP candidates moving forward. Okay. Then there's the second tier superstars. These are guys who can look like the top tier superstars on any given night, but each of them have an issue maintaining of that level of play, whether it's because of age or it's because of health, or maybe it's just something having to do with their mentality. Regardless of what it is, that group of guys, they can look like MVP candidate type of players, maybe half the year, maybe a third of the year, whatever it is, but they just struggle to remain at that level the way the guys at the very top do. The third tier is what we're starting today, and we're going to get more into that in a second. These are players that can be the best player on a championship team, but need an overwhelming amount of support. And then the last tier, which is all the players we did leading into today, ending with that Bam Adebayo and Victor Wembanyama video the other day. These are guys that aren't good enough to be the best player on championship teams yet, either because they're too specialized, like Bam as a defensive specialist, or guys like Dame and Kyrie as kind of like small guards that struggle to impact the game as athletes, or they're too young, like a guy like Victor Wembanyama especially, but Tyrese Halliburton I think kind of fits that bill a little bit as well, Tyrese Maxey as well. Those guys all have shots to move, especially the young players, have shots to move up the list in the long run, especially Victor. I think Victor could be a top 10 player even sooner. I have a lot of people that have criticized how low I have him on the list. We're going to get more into that in the mailbag. I don't want to do it right now. But again, like that last tier of guys, those are all guys that are not capable of being the best player on a championship team. This next phase of the list, these are guys who I do view that can be the best player on a championship team. They just need an overwhelming amount of support. So without any further ado, let's get into it with number 17, Donovan Mitchell. Last season, played 55 games. He also missed 2 playoff games. So availability was definitely a little bit of an issue last year for Donovan. He averaged 26.6 points per game, 5.1 rebounds per game, and 6.1 assists per game. It was one of the best passing season of his career, which we're going to get more into here in a little bit. He also averaged 2.3 stocks per game. This was Donovan Mitchell's best defensive season of his career. He really found a way to impact winning without having to be kind of on the ball, right? Now, he did have some on-ball reps, and he was very, very aggressive on the ball. He got a lot of steals. This was a guy that kind of weaponized his athleticism in a very aggressive sense on the ball. But where he really found a defensive role for Cleveland was off the ball. And one of his best traits is his athleticism, right? And so what he found that kind of worked for him was his ability to dig down into the lane. Meaning, like, if he's guarding a guy on the left wing and someone's driving on the right wing, he will sink down to the nail and swipe down at the basketball. But he also has the speed and the ability to stop on a dime and change direction to close out to shooters from there. And so he actually had a really useful role in the Cleveland defense as an off-ball defender, as a guy who would dig down into the lane and then recover out to shooters. Now, obviously, he could get a little over-aggressive sometimes, especially on the ball, and he made some mistakes. But I thought this was a big step forward for him on the defensive end of the floor last year in Cleveland. He was one of only 3 players in the league last year, Donovan Mitchell, to average at least 25 points per game and at least 1.5 steals per game. I thought that was a surprise. The first 2 guys, you won't be surprised, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and De'Aaron Fox. But the third guy to make that list was Donovan Mitchell. So shout out to Don for the best defensive season of his career. His shooting splits. He shot 46.2% from the field, 36.8% from 3, 86.5% from the line. That amounted to 54.5% in effective field goal percentage. That's just field goal percentage weighted for threes. And then 59.5% true shooting, which includes free throws as well, which is really, really good. So a nice, efficient scoring season for Donovan Mitchell. Some shooting stats from Synergy. His jump shot, he got 1.06 points per shot. He was especially effective off the catch. He got 1.14 points per shot off the catch in jump shooting situations, 1.17 points per shot when guarded, 1.09 when he's open. I found this interesting. Guys that really elevate on their shot, they actually tend to shoot a little bit better when they're contested. And the main reason why is they elevate really high on those kinds of shots. A lot of times those kinds of players, when they find themselves open, try to kind of relax a little bit and don't jump as high. And that actually can end up affecting their ability to knock down shots. And I always think that's funny when you see guys like Donovan, really athletic shooters who are actually a little bit more efficient off when they're getting contested versus when they're wide open. He was excellent off the dribble. He got 1.03 points per shot. That's 40% overall in field goal percentage and 52% when you weight it for threes. So really good pull-up shooting. Shot a really good 47.4% on long twos outside of 17 feet and then 47% on short pull-up twos inside of 17 feet. So damn near 50% on those pull-up mid-range jump shots. That became a really useful shot for him here in the last couple of seasons. He had a decent floater, shot just 42% on them, took about 2 per game. Obviously not as good as some of his peers around the league, but that's decent enough. But he was excellent going to the rim for a guard his size. He shot 61% at the rim, including 60% on layups. Usually small guards, they're in the mid to low 50s when you get into that layup range, just because they're shooting over trees all the time. But he was super efficient and high volume. He got 3.4 restricted area makes per game. Among players in the league that are below 6'5", only Tyrese Maxey and John Morant, who only played in 9 games, had more restricted area makes per game than Donovan Mitchell. So he's one of the best guys at getting to the rim. And honestly, the main thing that stood out to me, I went back and watched a bunch of his drives when I was watching film on him yesterday. And his footwork going to the basket is just absurd. His ability to quick Euro right to left or left to right. He had this left to right Euro on Devin Booker that sent Devin Booker flying into the stanchion and complaining at the refs, and as Donovan's just making an easy right-handed layup on the right side of the rim. And it was just an absurd move considering how fast he was going downhill to then plant that left foot and almost kind of cut his speed and get back to the right as Devin Booker was overreacting to that left side and went flying. It's just an unbelievable display of athleticism and footwork. He's got that Wade pullover dribble. I watched him do it to Austin Reeves, where he just pulled the ball right over his head and then kind of slid over to the left side and put it in off the glass. He's got those spin moves. He's got those hop steps. He's just got really good footwork, which again, as I talk about all the time on the show, when you have athleticism, that's one thing, but footwork is how you functionally get your athleticism to benefit you on the basketball court. I talk about this with my young players all the time, and I'm really emphasizing it now because we're in our early phase of the season, so there's a lot of new players. And if you have an opening to the right or an opening to the left for a pull-up jump shot, meaning there's a little bit of space there that you can get to, but you're only comfortable taking a jump shot off of the dribble with right-left footwork, then you're only going to be able to get to that spot going left. And if you see it right and you have to chop your feet or you have to hop into it, that little lack of efficiency is going to allow a good defender to recover to you. And like, that's the thing. Like, Donovan's a great athlete, but he's got all of the functional footwork that actually allows him to weaponize that athleticism. There are a lot of freaky athletic small guards in the league that aren't even close to 60% on layups. And again, it's not about like making super tough shots over contests. There are guys like that in the league, guys like Kyrie, guys like Steph, right, that are just really like shot makers when they get to the rim. But for the most part, it's about getting open layups. And how do you get open layups? By actually making moves in that short range to shed defenders and to create space so that you can just put the ball easily in off the backboard. Let's get into some play type data. So pick and roll. He was in the 80th percentile last year. He got 1.03 points per possession, including passes. Didn't quite make our high volume list. He was at just 885 possessions, but he had really good chemistry, specifically with Jarrett Allen. They ran a lot of action on the left side of the floor. They saw a lot of ice coverage, which is, again, where you see that guard defender deny the use of the screen and force you back towards the sideline. But Donovan had a really nice kind of like chemistry with Jarrett Allen where he would just quickly rescreen and actually screen Donovan towards the sideline. And he got a lot of these easy pull-up threes along that left wing just because of that screen chemistry that he had with Jarrett Allen. And that specifically is the kind of thing that you need when you're going to beat these kinds of coverages, right? Like, hey, we come up the left side, we know we're going to see an ice coverage there. I need you either to make yourself available to score, or I need you to screen me on that kind of sideline side. And you saw a lot of both of that. You saw the screens for those pull-up jump shots like I talked about. A lot of times the big in those ice coverages on defense would come up higher, and so Jarrett wouldn't even bother to set a screen. He would just kind of slip into that like 15-foot area. When he'd catch there, if the low man wasn't there, he'd just rip through and dunk it. And if he was, he would just shoot that little pop shot or that little short jump shot. And Jarrett Allen was their most effective roll man last year. Not hard to figure out. Evan Mobley obviously is still struggling in that regard. But the chemistry between Jarrett Allen and Donovan Mitchell is real. And that's now, because of the contract extensions for both guys, going to be a staple of Cleveland Cavalier basketball for a long time. In ISO situations, Donovan Mitchell was in the 74th percentile. He got 174 points on 174 possessions. You guys can go ahead and do the math there for what that is on a points per possession basis. I talked about his downhill moves earlier in those ISO situations, just getting into the defender's body and then using those like kind of footwork elements to shed that defender so that he can get into the basket. His pull-up jumper also just incredibly deadly, as we talked about. I think Donovan Mitchell has the best step-back jump shot going to his left for a small guard in the league in terms of getting separation. Obviously, a guy like Steph Curry is a better shooter. But in terms of the actual footwork and getting separation, Donovan has this hard pound dribble through the legs to the right where he like pounds it through the legs while gathering it back to the left. So he's basically whipping it and grabbing it and pulling it back to the left, and he covers so much ground and he gets such a wide base, he goes straight up and down at the end that it's actually turned into a really reliable ISO type of shot for him. It's a piece of footwork that I think a lot of athletic guards need to have. It's just a basic, I look at it as like a jab step with a live dribble. So you imagine you got you've got a triple threat, and the defender's kind of playing a little bit off of you, and you want to kind of establish your rhythm and get a little more separation. You'll throw a hard jab, and then you'll go up, right? Well, in a live dribble situation, that's where that move comes into the picture, right? You're dribbling in that high hesitation, and you pound between your legs and pull back. It basically functions as a jab step, even though you have a live dribble. And Donovan makes really nice use of that in ISO situations, which made him an effective ISO scorer last year. Again, he didn't make any of our high volume lists, but he was very effective in both pick and roll and ISO situations. It was the best playmaking season of Donovan Mitchell's career. Not only did he average a career high 6.1 assists per game, but this was also the first time in Donovan's entire career that he had an assist to turnover ratio over 2, meaning for the first time he had at least 2 assists for every turnover. That's a big step forward for him. And a big one that I noticed is those long steps at the rim that I talked about, those euros and those spins and those pullover dribbles and stuff like that. It allowed him to slow himself down at the rim, which in many cases brought over the low man more aggressively, and he just got really good at making that kick-out pass to the weak side corner when he would get into the rim. And then the second piece of it is just that roll chemistry with Jarrett Allen, which we talked about earlier. He had an excellent playoff run. He was flat out explosive. He went off for 50 in a game against Orlando. He had a hyper efficient 29-point game on the road in Boston to actually win that game in game 2 of that second round series. He averaged 30 points per game overall in the playoff run on 58% true shooting. It's just a casual reminder that Donovan's still one of the most explosive guards in the league within that playoff context where his athleticism is more of a factor. Areas of opportunity, he's still a volatile decision maker. His assist numbers cratered in the postseason. He was down to 4.7 points per game. He still has a tendency to try to solve problems in the game by hijacking things and looking to score, especially early in the clock. Like when things start to hit the fan, that's when he'll start to take a couple of like early clock pull-up jump shots. And, you get a couple of misses there, they can really kind of demoralize the team. And so he's just not as good as a game manager as some of his peers at the top of the league, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he's as explosive as he is. That's just his main area of opportunity, and he is getting a little better each year. And so here's the thing, I think Donovan's primed to make some real noise in his prime as we head into this phase where he's in his late 20s, early 30s. If he can stay healthy and maintain a good chunk of his athleticism, I think he can build that part of his game out and even go up a level from where he's at right now. Summer is heading into the bottom of the ninth, but with football season coming in hot, don't let those high summer vibes hit the bench. Change the game and elevate your everyday with Via. Via gives you the freedom to blaze your own trail and get fully legal hemp products discreetly shipped to your door in all 50 states. That new training schedule hitting you hard? Via's Relief line, designed to support your relaxation and restoration, is the ideal companion to level up your post-gym recovery and alleviate those aches and pains from years on the field. Via's organic flower is grown carefully and rigorously tested to ensure the highest quality, free from harsh pesticides or nasty chemicals. Via is also well-renowned for their award-winning THC and THC-free gummies, premium indoor THCA flower, soothing topicals, and calming drops, all crafted with the highest quality hemp sourced from trusted, independently owned American farms. One of the things I really appreciate about Via is they take the time to explain to you what their products are designed to do. You guys know how it gets with CBD products and THC products where it just is kind of confusing and you don't know how certain things are going to affect your body. Via takes that confusion out of the process. And they also have zero THC products. So if you don't like the way THC makes you feel, you can get similar effects from their non-THC products. They have things like Zen that help you sleep, things like Revive that give you relief, things like Flow State that help you focus. They have a wide range of non-THC products that you guys can take advantage of as well. Everything is made in the USA. They have top-notch customer support. And again, everything is sourced from the finest ingredients for your peace of mind, and it is lab tested and certified. If you're 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description and use code HOOPS, that's HOOPS, to receive 15% off. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Prioritize your recovery and enhance your everyday with Via. Again, if you are 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description and use the code HOOPS to receive 15% off. After you purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Prioritize your recovery and enhance your everyday with Via. Number 16, Jalen Brunson. Last year, he played 77 games, averaged 28.7 points per game, 3.6 rebounds per game, 6.7 assists per game, along with just 2.4 turnovers. As a matter of fact, Jalen Brunson was one of only 7 players in the NBA to average at least 25 points, at least 6 assists, and fewer than 3 turnovers. So in kind of exclusive company in terms of hyper-efficient, high-volume shot creators. Shooting splits, he shot 47.9% from the field, 40.1% from 3, 84.7% from the line. That amounted to 54.3% in effective field goal percentage weighted for threes and 59.2% true shooting when you add foul shooting into that. He averaged a career high 6.5 free throw attempts per game. Really a master of that low gathered, using pump fakes to get guys out of position, just adding to his efficiency and his overall scoring volume by getting to the line. That was the 16th most free throw attempts per game in the entire NBA last year. Shooting numbers per synergy, 1.09 points per jump shot. He was at 1.34 points per catch and shoot jump shot, which is insane. He shot 45% overall in field goal percentage on catch and shoot jump shots. That amounted to 67% in effective field goal percentage when you weight it for threes. That was in the 94th percentile. So he's one of the best catch and shoot guys in the league last year. He also got 1.02 points per pull-up jump shot. That was 43% in field goal percentage, 51% when you weight it for threes. And then he was the best floater shooter in the entire NBA last year. He shot 55% on floaters. 55%. Remember, we just talked about Donovan Mitchell at 42%. And he also had 315 attempts, which is the only player in the league to attempt over 300. So he's got the best floater in the game, and it's not particularly close. And when you look at the other guys that were in the top 5 for volume, and these guys were all below 300 attempts, but these are the other top guys in the top 5, Tyus Jones, Trae Young, CJ McCollum, Tyrese Maxey. Not a single one of them got over 1.04 points per floater. Brunson was at 1.18. That's a substantial gap. He's just the best at it, or at least he was last season. And then 55% at the rim, that's solid for a small guard. It's kind of where you expect it. It's not very good, not very bad either. He had 3.7 attempts per game, which is also in the restricted area, which is also solid for a small guard who doesn't have a lot of speed or quickness. Play type data from Synergy. Ran 1,514 pick and rolls, including passes. That was the most in the entire NBA. You got 1,607 points out of them. That amounts to 1.06 points per possession. This was in the 80th percentile for efficiency. He made a high volume list, obviously, as the highest volume pick and roll player in the league. Out of the 15 players to run at least 1,000 ball screens, including passes, Jalen Brunson ranked 7th in the entire NBA. Not a great ISO year for him, though. He ran 422 ISOs and got just 377 points, including passes. That amounted to 0.89 points per possession. He personally shot just 39% in those situations. In our high volume list, he ranked 24th out of the 24 players to run at least 250 ISOs. So he was the worst high-volume ISO player in the league last year. But I view this as mostly a blip and just kind of an unusual circumstance because last year, the year before last, I should say, he got 1.10 points per ISO, including passes, which ranked 5th out of the 25 players to run at least 250. So he was one of the best high-volume ISO players in the league last year. And then in this year's playoff run, he was at 1.04 points per ISO, including passes, which is a really good number. So in all likelihood, the ISO numbers last year were just kind of a blip. I think a big part of it, too, was Julius Randle being out for basically half the season. And so he just had a lot of rescue possessions where he had to throw shit up at the end of the shot clock. And I think that probably hurt his efficiency in that regard to a certain extent. The playoff run for Jalen Brunson was super impressive. He averaged 32.4 points per game, 7.5 assists to just 2.7 turnovers. That amounted to a respectable 54% in true shooting percentage, which was great considering the circumstances, like I talked about earlier, especially with the injuries later in the playoff run and then obviously not having Julius Randle as a substantial secondary shot creator. The Philly series in particular was insane to me. When you watch those first 2 games, the Sixers were throwing the kitchen sink at him. He had a steady diet of like 6'8", 6'9" athletic wings that were chasing him over the top of screens and applying back pressure, pressuring him on his way up the floor, trying to funnel him into Joel Embiid, who in a deep drop coverage can still be effective as a defensive player. They were digging down in the lane off of other players when he would drive. It was about as tough of a defensive look as you'll see for a single shot creator. And he averaged 36 points and 9 assists in that series. And that was after a rough couple of games. If you take out the first 2 games, he averaged 42 and 10. 42 points and 10 assists in the last 4 games of the series on 59% true shooting. It was a very, very impressive display of half-court shot creation from Jalen Brunson. And the Knicks just fell apart with injuries. I strongly believe that they would have made the conference finals. I think they would have beat Indy in 5 had they stayed healthy. But once OG Anunoby went down in Game 2, it was just basically over at that point. His weaknesses. Jalen Brunson doesn't really have the ability to impact the game as an athlete in any capacity, which obviously hurts his overall two-way impact. But to his credit, he does his job on defense. And he holds up well enough on an island in ISO, mainly because he's strong, that he's not really a weak point either. In addition to that, he's made himself one of the best half-court surgeons in the game, as we've discussed at length at this point. He's a deadly drop coverage beater. He can hit pull-up threes when you duck under picks. He can hit pull-up twos when you chase over the top. He's the best floater shooter in the league. He's proven his ability to be a high-level playmaker. I think he's the best small guard in the league after Steph Curry. And I think he's demonstrated that to a great extent. The guys that I have above him, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that I feel like I have Brunson too low. And again, these guys are all in the same tier to me, so we're kind of splitting hairs. But the guys that I have above him are all bigger, better athletes, and that goes a long way towards your ability to impact winning. But I don't see much of a gap between him and really anybody in this tier. This tier is all very bunched up in that regard. But I think in terms of just looking at the small guards in the league, the guys below like 6'5", I think that he's the best small guard in the league after Steph Curry. Why is he above Donovan Mitchell? I think Jalen's a better game manager and decision maker than Donovan Mitchell. That's the main differentiator. He's far less susceptible to like those 5 or 6 possession stretches that Donovan can have, where he just takes a bunch of bad shots and kind of loses sight of the bigger picture. And that, to me, especially in the playoff context, is super valuable. Jalen Brunson has stamped himself as a legitimate number 1 on a championship team this year by demonstrating that he can generate enough offense to win a playoff series without a legitimate co-star. Again, I believe they would have made the conference finals had they stayed healthy. But at the same time, the Knicks are aware that he needs a lot of support, and he will have that this year. The addition of Mikal Bridges and Julius Randle coming back from injury, either as a player or as a trade piece, and also factoring the re-signing of OG Anunoby, that gives Brunson a bunch of high-level two-way players that allow him to focus on what he does best, which is just being that half-court surgeon. So, again, he's incredibly good at one specific thing, and if you can point him and shoot him that way and account for everything else with your role players, you give yourself a good chance. And I'm really curious to see how that experiment works this season. Have you been hungry for some college football? Well, we finally get a taste this weekend. Don't miss any of the action. Jump in at DraftKings Sportsbook. It's a small but mighty slate of games for Week 0, including a big matchup in Ireland. This is going to be DraftKings' biggest college football season to date. Enjoy the ride now all the way through the expanded playoffs. Plus, all newbies getting into the college spirit, here's something extra special. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings all college football season long. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings, the crown is yours. You know, whatever your vibe, it's a Camry vibe. That's the reason the Toyota Camry has been America's best-selling sedan for the past 22 years. And the all-new Camry takes it to a new level. It comes equipped with a standard 225 horsepower engine and available sport-tuned suspension, providing power, speed, and agility. Think of the Camry as your typical swingman. And it's a good-looking car, too. The Camry racing on the 2025 NASCAR circuit was based on the racing-inspired design of the all-new Camry, with available features including two-tone midnight black metallic roof and rear spoiler and 19-inch alloy wheels. The interior is just as fly. The Camry has a modern interior design with available features like a leather-trimmed steering wheel and multi-stage heated and ventilated front seats. We're talking fundamentals and flash. You don't see that combo often on the court or on the road. And because every all-new Camry is a hybrid, it has awesome fuel efficiency with up to an EPA estimated 51 miles per gallon combined. Whatever your vibe, it's a Camry vibe. Learn more at toyota.com/Camry. All right, let's get to the mailbag. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like 9 questions. We'll see. I may be miscounting there, so we'll see. Jason, I have to disagree with you for not putting Drew Holiday on the in contention list. Dude is one of the few guys with multiple championships on different rosters, arguably the best perimeter defender in the league, played more on a stacked USA team than almost anyone else in the contention list, contributes heavily to winning. Man deserves his flowers. He should get on the possible top 25 list. I totally agree. It was just an accidental oversight on my part. He's better than a lot of the guys that made my preliminary 45 list. So again, it was just an accident. That kind of thing happens when you do what I do for a living. Stuff just slips through the cracks and I make mistakes. Kyrie was 50, 40, 90, playing next to the most ball-dominant player, and is a much better defender than Fox, as we just saw in the playoffs. What real argument does Fox have over Kyrie? Well, for starters, I disagree that Kyrie's a better defender than Fox. Fox, I thought he demonstrated, especially at that in that Warriors series, that he has pretty considerable defensive upside. And also with DeMar DeRozan in the mix now as a high volume shot creator that can kind of take some of those duties away from him. Now Fox will have an opportunity to devote more resources in that direction. I expect De'Aaron Fox to have the best defensive season of his career this year. So I think Kyrie's a good and useful defensive player, but I think De'Aaron Fox, especially within the context of what Kyrie has, is like playing alongside a secondary star where he can focus his energy there. I think Fox is a more capable and a more impactful defensive player. I also think Fox is clearly a better basketball player overall, especially as a primary shot creator. He's way more athletic. He has much better size for the position. He applies substantially more rim pressure, which is one of the most valuable things you can do offensively. I don't have to get into it right now, but just getting to the rim and occupying defenders and getting shots up on the glass is so valuable to an offense, both for generating open threes and offensive rebound opportunities. But, one last thing. He's also proven to be a much more durable and reliable guy to lead his team over the 82-game stretch, as well as for potential playoff rounds. So I think Fox is a better basketball player. That said, to your point, there is a real case that Kyrie is a better number 2 alongside another star because of his ability to play off the ball and because of his ability to rescue possessions as a tough shot maker. And that's a fair point. I have a mailbag question that I didn't put in today's show because it's more relevant tomorrow. But I have a mailbag question for our next show that's regarding Devin Booker and Jalen Brown that gets into this concept. And it's a legitimate counterpoint. And I totally agree. But for the record, we're splitting hairs here. And I have Fox at 24 and Kyrie at 25. So I obviously don't see much of a difference overall between those two guys. I think De'Aaron Fox in a vacuum, if you were drafting to start a franchise, again, there's 30 NBA teams. There's 30 NBA teams, and if we were doing an open draft and you had the 24th pick, you're picking to be the best player on your team. So, like, De'Aaron Fox is who you're taking in that spot over a guy like Kyrie Irving. But that point about Kyrie being a better number 2 is fair, and that's a big part of why Kyrie is as high on this list as he is. But at the same time, I gave the slight nod to Fox. But again, we're talking about a very, very tiny margin here, guys. I just don't understand how you can think LeBron can get through a full playoff at this point as a top 5 player. He looked fantastic in the Olympics, but that was not as much of a grinder as the conference finals and finals. Even in the Olympics, he was losing steam by the end of the gold medal game. Once again, not a slight. He is 39. It is incredible how well he played. LeBron got away with some cruise control in 2023 and really wasn't top 5 until wasn't top 5 LeBron until he realized the Nuggets were not going to let him rest. Without Davis, there was no way he even gets to the most competitive sweep in NBA history. I think you are greatly underestimating how much of a buzzsaw the NBA playoffs are, especially after an NBA season. And for the Lakers, a play-in. You see a bunch of young players run up and not realize what they are getting into. I think there are 2 levels. The physical, which is the second and third round, and mental, buzzsaw in the finals itself. I think Ant ran into the first one last year and Luka ran into the second one. LeBron obviously knows, hence the cruise control in 2023. In 2024, he knew the Nuggets would crush him if he didn't try. I would add having this playoff experience to rankings because I think it is important for players to learn this as well as additional durability. Think about the players who didn't make it through the playoff grinder. Even Jordan had to learn about this. Ant is better for experience and possibly Luka. I suppose it is a plus that LeBron knows this. I also think this helped Curry in 2022 a lot. There's definitely something to a superstar getting to the finals and experiencing the pacing. So here's the thing. There are a lot of people that I've seen. There was a Celtics buddy of mine named Mike who told me that he thought that the 2020 Lakers benefited from the gap, the break from the COVID shutdown because it gave them a chance to rest so that they could get through the playoff run. Here's the thing. LeBron is still yet to miss a single playoff game in his entire career. So the idea that he can't hold up for a 2-month playoff run is completely theoretical. It's based on like, he's old, maybe he won't do it, but we've never actually seen him not be able to do it. In 2023, he got hurt, and he played on it, and he still averaged 25, 10, and 7 on 58% true shooting. And he got stronger as the playoffs went on. In the Nuggets series, he averaged 28, 10, and 10, and shot 52% from the field. So, like, here's the thing. He definitely conserves energy in the regular season. And by the way, that's why he won't be top 5 on this list, even though I think I'd pick him top 5 for a playoff series that starts tomorrow, right? That has to be factored in. Because as you mentioned, the Lakers sometimes have to play in the play-in. A big part of why the Lakers have had to play in the play-in has been LeBron has to conserve a certain amount of energy because he's old in the 82. But When we get to the 4 rounds, I understand skepticism. He's going to be 40, blah, 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 blah. But he's never missed a playoff game. So, like, whatever idea you might have about whether or not he can't hold up, that it's just theoretical at this point. It's not actually based on anything that's actually happened. But again, I don't have LeBron in my top 5. I'll give you guys like a little tiny teaser. I still have Tatum above LeBron in the 82 game context, even though I think LeBron is a substantially better, like, 2-week basketball player. Okay. So, like, I am factoring that in. I just think that within the playoff context, I think it's unfair to LeBron to be like, oh, but maybe he won't be available when all he's ever been has been available, right? Mailbag question about your criteria for these rankings. Number 1, your number 1 criterion is half-court offensive creation. Doesn't that reward heliocentric players like Doncic and Morant, who rack up substantial counting stats, but whose team offense is easier to stop than 5-out offense? If you prefer 5-out as the more resilient offensive approach, shouldn't the half-court criteria be playmaking both on and off the ball like Curry and Tatum? I'd rather a star get involved in the screening and cutting than simply the counting stats. For the record, I agree with you in your overall basketball philosophy that heliocentric basketball is not as overall effective as, like, 5-out play with each other team-based basketball. That said, like, Luka Doncic is so much better than Jason Tatum as a half-court shot creator that even if I disagree about the play style, it just still is a gap that we have to account for. And so, like, again, like, I when I talk about half-court offensive creation, I'm extending that to 5-out as well. And that is why Steph, I still consider to be in the superstar tier, even though he's declined a certain amount over the course of the tail end of last season. Like, I still believe that shot creation value of him running around off of screens and the gravity and all of that is still so profoundly impactful. I also think Curry is going to shoot better this year. We'll see. But, like, I want to be clear. Like, I'm not favoring heliocentric players. I'm just saying that among all the different things that I value, that elite half-court offensive creation is still the thing that I think is most valuable in the league. Second part of your question. I also think that leaving out defense, which you do discuss when actually ranking, and rebounding as explicit criteria is a major mistake. I want my star to greatly impact all parts of the game like AD and Giannis. I'm not leaving out defense. Just because I have half-court shot creation as more valuable than defense doesn't mean I don't value defense. It's still in there. It's still part of the equation for me. I had Bam Adebayo in my top 20, right? Like, I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying that I think that the half-court high-end offensive creation is the most valuable piece that any single player can bring to the team. Hey, Jason, can you explain why Dame is higher than Fox? I'm just curious of the thought process in basketball reasoning. Thanks, and keep up the good work. I think Dame is just a much better shot maker, which I think is super valuable in the playoffs when things get tight. So, for example, in Dame's last 2 playoff runs, he's attempted 13 threes per game and made 44% of them. That's insane. He's at 33 points per game on 62% true shooting in his last 10 playoff games. So here's the thing. I do think De'Aaron Fox is a better regular season player right now because he's a better athlete. He applies a lot more rim pressure. He's a better defensive player. He's just more impactful over the 82. That said, that playoff part of it is part of it for me, and I just think Dame is a better half-court shot creator in the playoffs, kind of similar to what we were just talking about. So that gave him the edge for me. But it's also worth mentioning that I have all these guys in the same tier. So, like, it's not like I think Dame's here and Fox is here. They're right next to each other. I'm just giving the nod to Dame. The tiers for me are designed to actually signify a difference in the levels, if that makes sense. Overanalyzing on John Morant, in my opinion. Lillard and Maxey are not just better than him just because their shooting numbers are better. Wait, okay, hold on. Lillard and Maxey are not better than him just because their shooting numbers are better. My list, they are multiple tiers below. Ja led back-to-back 50-plus win teams when he last really played, and stats can't measure the difference his mere presence on the court provides given his insane speed and athleticism, and he's a better defender than both Lillard and Maxey. Before the 22-23 season, he was horrible, but in that season, his D was fine. We saw Maxey without Embiid. He wasn't that amazing or winning games, and Dame is getting older and was wildly inconsistent last year. Couple things. I actually do think Tyrese Maxey is a better defender than Ja. I do think Ja is a better defender than Dame, though. I agree that Ja is a better basketball player when he's available than those guys. I've said this on the show before, but like, I think Ja has like top 10 potential when he's available. The thing is, he has missed 86 of the Grizzlies' last 108 games. And that wasn't just the suspension either. Like, there were health issues there. So, like, that's the main thing that has him this far back on the list. I'm a huge believer in what Ja Morant is capable of. He just needs to prove that he can actually be available to his team before he can be regarded that high on the list. There's actual, can he stay healthy concerns with Ja that extend beyond even the suspension stuff. Thoughts on Maxi's upside? I know you mentioned Ja's potential was higher, but I'm curious how close that is. Like you said, he's a great leader, a workaholic, and one of the best off-the-catch shooters we've seen. If that off-the-dribble develops while he's playing with someone like Embiid, I can see his playmaking improving as well. Even if he's mid at defense at his peak, a player averaging 27 to 28 with 4 rebounds and 7 assists on 61% true shooting is MVP-level stuff. The main gap between Ja and Maxey, in my opinion, is the ability to stop on a dime and the vertical pop. That makes Ja much more dynamic as a scorer in the short range, which makes him much harder to guard, in my opinion. But I do think Tyrese Maxey has superstar upside. He's just got further to go. I think he has to become a substantially better passer than he is, and then that pull-up jumper efficiency like we talked about earlier. So if he can improve dramatically in those two areas, I think he can enter into that tier. But Ja is not as dependent on the jump shot because he's just so dynamic with his ability to change direction, with his ability to get downhill and then suddenly at 5 feet just pop up off the ground and shoot a floater, right there. He's so dynamic in that short range as a scorer, it just makes him borderline impossible to guard. I take issue with the methodology used here in which durability plays a factor into how we rank players. If we are ranking players based on basketball talent alone in a vacuum, then durability should not be a part of the equation. Injuries can happen to anyone at any time. A better measure of how good players are in a vacuum should assume health. That way we can compare the on-court impact and the play of these players and rank them accordingly. Ranking a player lower due to availability is disingenuous to the idea of ranking them in a vacuum. I disagree. The main thing is, we can't just assume. You said earlier, you mentioned injuries can happen to anyone at any time. That's true, but I think we all have to admit that certain players are more susceptible to injuries than others. That's just a fact that we can see in the availability of some of these guys. Also, the entire premise of the list, what I mean by in a vacuum means from October 1st through to mid-June, all 30 franchises drafting all 450 players. Who are you taking? So, if a guy is really good for the 2 months but has injury issues over the 82, that has to be factored in. It just does. It's in a vacuum within the context of a full season from training camp all the way through to the end of the NBA Finals. And so that to me is why availability has to factor. So I'm not actually listing a mailbag question here because there was just a bunch of these, but I had a bunch of people talk about how I had Wemby too low and specifically why I have Bam over him for this particular season. For the record, I think Victor Wembanyama is very capable of being the best player of the league in the league sooner than later. I'm a huge believer in Wemby. I'm a huge fan of Wemby. However, you guys know how I feel about young basketball players, particularly when it comes to making mistakes. I actually think you could argue an overall winning impact over the 82 games. Wemby absolutely should be higher. That I agree with you. I think he's going to be just a complete wrecking ball for this 82 games. However, when you get into the playoffs, there are so many close games. There are so many games that are decided by a handful of possessions. So much of it comes down to execution. And young players in particular have a problem preventing mistakes and replicating what works. They're a little bit more volatile, right? Bam, for instance, is not going to be nearly as impactful as Wemby over the 82, but for a playoff series, he just has so much experience. He has NBA Finals experience. He's played in, I don't even know, a dozen playoff series. He's just been in so many of those environments, and you can count on him for the most part to not make mistakes and to just do his job. And so again, long term, Wemby's obviously way better than Bam. Short term in the regular season, Wemby's obviously way better than Bam. But when I'm factoring in what it's going to be like in a knockdown, drag out, physical 7-game series in May, I just give Bam the slightest edge because he's less mistake prone at this point. Wemby still has a tendency to take a few bad shots. There were some times in FIBA where he'd take a kind of a contested early clock three, or over penetrate and get into traffic and turn the basketball over. Those sorts of things over the 82, he can easily make up for in the massive sample size by being the wrecking ball that is Wemby. But when you get into nut crunching time, that's where it's that mistake can be catastrophic, right? And so again, just within the context of the goal of getting to mid-June, for just this season, I barely give Bam an edge. But I think I think there's a good chance Wemby gets some playoff experience this year. Like, I think there's a chance he gets into that play-in picture, and who knows, wins a couple of games, he could get a 7-game series. I just think Wemby needs some experience. And by the way, guys, I'm pretty consistent with this. You guys know, guys that are below the age of 22, they're not going to be very high on my lists. Because that's just the way that I see the game. I think young players struggle to replicate what works, and they struggle to avoid making mistakes. But don't take that as Wemby criticism. That's how I feel about every young player, and I'm as big a Wemby fan as you'll find out there. Hey, Jason, just a bit of my 2 cents about Bam's spot on the list. Difference between Bam and AD is that he doesn't have LeBron James, Austin Reeves, and D'Lo getting him those easy buckets at the rim all game. He hasn't had a high-level playmaker since D. Wade was in the backcourt throwing him lobs. First of all, I disagree. I think Jimmy Butler is a high-level playmaker. Also, AD is just a much, much higher-level offensive player than Bam. Guys, like, Bam is incapable of doing what AD did to Jokic in the first round this year. AD was going at Jokic repeatedly and cooking his ass one-on-one. Forced Mike Malone to make a change and take Jokic off of him. That's how good AD is as a one-on-one ISO/post-up player. Bam has 2 30-point games in the playoffs in his entire career. AD has 23. So, like, they just aren't on the same tier as basketball players. I don't see, as much as I love Bam, AD's just flat out better than him. And so, like, I don't think it's about playmaking. Again, he plays with Jimmy Butler, who is one of the better playmaking wings in the league. So I just don't see that as enough of an excuse. Great breakdown on Fox, but there's no way Hallie is better than him. If we're going to believe in players when they are extremely healthy, Fox averaged 30 points a game before he sprained his ankle. Hallie is a terrible point of attack defender. Fox is arguably one of the best. Fox averaged 2 steals per game from the point of attack. Fox is a closer, and Hallie fades during big-time moments. Hallie can't be higher than off 2.5 months of great basketball and completely disregarding the rest of the season. We're not disregarding the rest of the season. Halliburton is one of the best offensive engines in all of basketball, even when he's hampered. When he's healthy and playing on a good hamstring, he's arguably the 3rd best overall offensive engine behind that Jokic-Luka tier. Like, that's how good he is. He was the very best high-volume pick-and-roll player in the entire league last year. When he was healthy, the Pacers had an offensive rating of 124. He is incredible at consistently getting the defense in rotation, which makes everything easier for everybody on the court. Halliburton is the guy that you can't just look at the box score. He is an offensive engine who consistently gets the defense in rotation. It's similar to the Caitlin Clark thing. Like, Caitlin Clark's offensive impact cannot be quantified just by points and assist numbers. Like, Tyrese Halliburton is one of the best offensive engines in all of basketball. De'Aaron Fox, to me, is one of the best guards in the league, but I don't think he kind of falls into that, like, top tier offensive engine list like Tyrese Halliburton does. He's got a lot of issues, which is why Halliburton and Fox are still close despite that gap. However, I do think that Hallie and what he brings as an offensive engine gives him the edge there. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. We'll be right back tomorrow with another 2 players. Actually, I think this one's actually going to come out on Thursday. But a really interesting debate between two players that are kind of different archetypes, playing in very different roles, but and bring very different things to the table. But I kind of view them right next to each other, and you could debate either way. I'm excited to get into that with you guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Also, last thing, I did do a video on Two Sons podcast talking about the news that The Acolyte was canceled after season 1. So me and Luke talked for like 35 minutes yesterday, just kind of getting into all the details of what that means for Star Wars. Again, you can find that wherever you find your podcasts under Two Sons, or on YouTube under Two Sons Podcast. I always appreciate when you guys support over there as well. All right, thanks, guys. Thanks for rocking with me and the support. I will see you guys in a couple of days.